George. Well, it is my pleasure to present for you the program Ray Bradbury, Waukegan's Influence on a Visionary. Ray Bradbury, he was born on August 22nd, 1920 in Waukegan. So yes, we did just celebrate the centennial of his birth. We didn't quite get to celebrate it to the full extent that we were hoping to due to the COVID pandemic, but we still had a lot of fun. Now, this Waukegan boy would grow up and become one of America's best novelists, short story writers, essayists, playwright, screenwriter, poet, and really the list goes on. He was prolific in so many things. And tonight I will talk to you about the impact that Waukegan had on Bradbury during the formative years of his life. From there, I will also cover some of the ways that he remembered his hometown in some of his writings. Ray's parents were Leonard and Esther Marie Bradbury. He had one older brother, Leonard, and two other siblings that died in infancy. Ray had a loving extended family, and they all lived very close to each other in Waukegan. Ray's childhood home is located at 11 South St. James Street. Right next door lived his grandparents, Samuel H. and Minnie Bradbury, and this is at 619 Washington Street. Both of these homes are still standing today, and they are private residences. And many of the other Bradbury family members, they lived close to Ray's childhood home, and really within the same block. Most of the Bradburys were very close to each other. And Ray enjoyed and remembered fondly later in life having his family all right there. Now, Bradbury's family legacy goes back to the earliest days of Little Fort, which was the name of the first settlement prior to the name change to Waukegan. The story starts in 1836 with DeWitt and Leonard Spaulding, Ray's great-great-uncles, leaving New York to settle in Little Fort, looking for better opportunities and more available farmland. DeWitt and Leonard traveled the Erie Canal to Buffalo, New York, and from there walked to Little Fort, Illinois. More Spauldings followed with Ray's great-great-grandparents, Luther and wife Charlotte Hinkston, arriving in Little Fort in 1840 with their 7-year-old daughter, Mary, Ray's great-grandmother. Luther and his family traveled the full journey from New York to Little Fort by boats on the Erie Canal and the Great Lakes. Luther purchased 160 acres and built the first two-story log cabin in the county. Two-story meaning two rooms, not two stories, one on top of the other. And the Spaulding homestead was located on Green Bay Road and Grand Avenue. And this area is still locally known today as Spaulding's Corner. Samuel I. Bradbury, Bradbury's great-grandfather, arrived in Little Fort from Albany, New York in 1847 with his mother Frances Mary Rochad, the great-great-grandmother, and siblings following the death of his father. Samuel first worked as a hand on the schooner Gazelle on Lake Michigan. In New York, Samuel had been an apprentice in a printing business, and in Little Fort, he resumed this practice and soon became the editor and publisher of several local newspapers. Samuel I. Bradbury and Mary Spaulding married in Waukegan on November 25th, 1851. Samuel and Mary had 5 children, including Samuel Hinkston Bradbury, Ray's grandfather, who was born on May 3rd, 1858 in Waukegan. Samuel I. would continue to be important in the printing and publishing business. The Bradbury family, from his parents and grandparents to his early ancestors, all played a special part in Ray's life, and they had influence on what he would become. Now, for a young Ray Bradbury, Waukegan had everything that was needed to help grow his imagination. Waukegan was a thriving city in the 1920s with a population of over 26,000. It had a bustling downtown with shops, restaurants, recreation, and entertainment centers. It was a diverse community with people from all over the world who had come to Waukegan for the many jobs at the lakefront factories. There were streetcars running up and down the main streets, numerous theaters to watch the latest movies, and ravines that cut throughout the city. As a child, growing up in Waukegan, Ray attended Central School. Ray was never one to take highly to formal education, and he always felt that most of his knowledge was gained from going to the library. So I wouldn't say that Central School, going to school, was one of Ray's great influences in his life. But one of those great influences, again, was the library. The Waukegan Public Library helped guide him down the path of writing. And this library was located on the northeast corner of Sheridan Road and Washington Street. This library was just a few blocks from Ray's home, and he could take a straight streetcar directly there or walk. From the stories that he has shared, it sounds like he almost always walked. This allowed for more exploring and sometimes a little mischief. It was at this library where young Ray fell in love with reading. In the introduction to Fahrenheit 451, Bradbury said of the Waukegan Library, "From the time I was 9 up through my teens, I spent at least 2 nights a week in the town library in Waukegan, Illinois. In the summer months, there was hardly a day I could not be found lurking about the stacks, smelling the books like imported spices, drunk on them even before I read them." And another great influence on young Ray was going to the movies. Bradbury himself gave a great deal of credit to his Aunt Nevada for prepping his mind in the realm of fantasy while growing up in Waukegan. His Aunt Neva, as he called her, would take him to the various local theaters such as the Academy, Elite, and Genesee to watch the latest movies. Now, Bradbury claimed that he never missed a movie, starting in 1920 when he was born. Bradbury wrote in the afterwords to Farewell Summer, "She saw to it that I was fed all the best fairy tales, poetry, cinema, and theater, so that I was continually in a fever about life and eager to write it all down." Motion pictures would become a passion for Bradbury. Now, by the end of the 1920s, the Bradbury family were moving back and forth between Tucson, Arizona, and Waukegan as his father pursued employment. Ray's father worked for the Bureau of Power and Light in Waukegan, and eventually he was laid off during the Great Depression. So they're going back and forth wherever there was available work. But luckily for the world, no, lucky for the universe, Ray and his family were back in Waukegan during Labor Day weekend in 1932. It was this weekend when Ray Bradbury's life changed forever. The family was back to attend the funeral of an uncle. Following the funeral at Waukegan's Oakwood Cemetery, Ray was very distraught. He looked down the bluff towards Lake Michigan, and there he saw one of the favorite things happening. A carnival was in town. Ray walked down the bluff to the carnival, and he wandered into the tent to see the show of Mr. Electrico. Here I will read in Bradbury's own words this impactful and memorable experience. Ray said, I was 12 years old when Mr. Electrico arrived on Labor Day weekend, 1932, sat in his electric chair to be electrocuted, dubbed me with his fiery sword until my hair rose and sparks jumped from my nostrils, and cried, "Live forever." Next day, I ran back to the carnival grounds to find out just how to do that. Mr. Electrico introduced me to all the carnival freaks behind the scenes, including Hippo Lady, the human skeleton, and the illustrated man. We sat on the beach and he listened to my grand ideas about my irresistible future. I wandered out of that carnival stunned and stood by the rushing horses of the carousel, listening to the calliope wheezing beautiful Ohio, and wept. I knew that something amazing had struck me with electric fire and changed me forever. Within 8 weeks, I began to write. I wrote every day after that for the next 65 years. In 1934, when Ray was 14, now this picture of him is a little bit younger than that, but it's another one from our archives. But at age 14, the Bradbury family made the permanent move to Los Angeles, California. The family would still come back to Waukegan to visit with family. They were back in August of 1935. We know this because there is evidence of Ray in the local newspaper. On August 18, 1935, Ray is published for the very first time, and it is in the Waukegan paper. He wrote a poem in memory of actor Will Rogers, who had died on August 15th. I will read to you Ray's first published poem. August 18th, 1935, Waukegan Daily Gazette. In memory to Will Rogers, Ray Bradbury. The man jested through his life and chased away all care and strife. The man whom we call just plain Bill, our ambassador of goodwill, has laid away his ink and pen to see his maker once again. No more the cheerful smile, the grin that warmed the nation's heart within. No more the homely humor of the simple man we grew to love, who won his way into our heart. And now when time comes to part, no effort made to shield our tears for our true friendship through the years. Upon your tomb we placed a wreath, upon your head we this bequeath, that we will not forgotten be, you'll live throughout eternity, as monument to all mankind, to poor, to sick, to mute and blind, down in our hearts as burns a flame, emblazoned on us that one name. Will Rogers lived, and as he died, a world of men broke down and cried. Besides of Blair and overhead, a circling plane colored as red as sunset's glow, flies down, then slowly turns toward north as if its heart still yearns for eyes spaces in the air. Off it flies we know not where, for we are stilled upon this day, our friend Will has passed away. So that poem written and published right before Ray turned 15. Now, after moving out to California, Bradbury had started submitting his short stories for publication, and by 1943, he became a full-time writer. And Bradbury's first major publications were the Martian Chronicles in 1950, followed by the Illustrated Man in 1951. And these works helped grow Bradbury's reputation as a writer. Now, remember I just referenced the Illustrated Man as one of the carnival folks that Bradbury met that fateful weekend, Labor Day weekend in 1932 with Mr. Electrico. And in the Martian Chronicles, well, Waukegan finds itself on Mars, actually, in that story. But he changes the name from Waukegan to Greentown. If you haven't read Martian Chronicles, The Illustrated Man, I highly recommend them both. And I'll talk a little bit about Greentown here in just a bit. And the book that many consider to be Ray Bradbury's masterpiece, Fahrenheit 451, was published in 1953. Fahrenheit 451 was written by Bradbury in the basement of UCLA's Powell Library on a pay typewriter that he rented for a fee of 10 cents per half hour. Bradbury claimed that he wrote the novel in just 9 days for a total of $9.80 in typewriter rental fees. The events of Ray's childhood, such as meeting with Mr. Electrico at the carnival, inspired the young boy to start writing. Now, though living far away from Waukegan and with a few successful publications to his name, Bradbury visited his childhood home in his memories. He was now creating a novel that was much different from his previous works. He was constructing Dandelion Wine. It was 1957 when Bradbury completed his masterpiece, Dandelion Wine. In this novel, Bradbury himself steps back in time to when he was a 12-year-old boy in Waukegan. It is considered a semi-autobiography in which Bradbury uses real places, people, and events that he experienced while growing up in Waukegan in the 1920s and early 30s. Even though Bradbury and his family moved away, the influences of Waukegan never left him. In the introduction to Dandelion Wine, Bradbury tells how he was able to write the novel. He said, "First, I rummaged my mind for words that could describe my personal nightmares, fears of night and time from my childhood, and shaped stories from these. Then, I took a long look at the green apple trees in the old house I was born in, and a house next door where lived my grandparents, and all the lawns of the summers I grew up in, and I began to try works for all that. What you have here in this book then is a gathering of dandelions from all those years. I was gathering images all my life, storing them away and forgetting them. Somehow I had to send myself back with words as catalysts to open the memories out and see what they had to offer. And then I wanted to call back what the ravine was like, especially those nights when walking home late across town, my brother would run ahead and hide under the Ravine Creek Bridge like the lonely one and leap up and grab me, shrieking, so I ran, fell, and ran again, gibbering all the way home. Now that was great stuff." When Bradbury finished rummaging his mind, he had Dandelion Wine. The novel takes place in 1928 Waukegan, but he changes the name of the town. Bradbury transforms Waukegan into Greentown, Illinois. The main character is Douglas Spaulding. He is a 12-year-old boy, and his experiences are loosely patterned after summer occurrences of Bradbury while growing up in Waukegan. Bradbury's actual middle name was Douglas, and Spaulding was the maiden name of his great-grandmother and also the middle name of his father. The novel focuses on the day-to-day routines of a small town in America, and it shows the joys of years past. The novel contains Bradbury's family, friends, and real people and places from Waukegan. There are stories of a pair of brand new tennis shoes, the distant clang of the trolley's bell, a best friend moving away, a human time machine who can transport you back to the Civil War, and a machine able to glimpse the bittersweet future. As a historian, I've pulled out sections of Dandelion Wine to share with you that tell us and show us a little bit of Waukegan's past. I have pulled some sections from the novel to paint a better picture through Bradbury's words of Greentown or Waukegan in the summer of 1928. I hope you enjoy the words of Bradbury as he describes his hometown in his own unique way. There were a million small towns like this all over the world, each as dark, as lonely, as removed, as full of shuddering wonder. The reedy playing of minor key violins was the small town's music with no lights but many shadows. Oh, the vast swelling loneliness of them, the secret damp ravines of them. Life was a horror lived in the night when at all sides sanity, marriage, children, happiness were threatened by an ogre called death. Warm summer twilight in upper Illinois country in this little town deep and far away from everything, kept to itself by a river and a forest and a meadow and a lake. The sidewalks still scorched, the stores closing, and the streets shadowed. The moon came over the edge of the lake and looked upon Greentown, Illinois, and saw it all and showed it all, every house, every tree. And I've picked a few other parts from the novel to compare them to real places and events from actual Waukegan's past. First, we will start downtown with the trolley that used to go up and down the streets of Waukegan. The electric trolley would have been a fixture in downtown Waukegan during Bradbury's time, and the line actually ran right past his grandparents' home, so just steps away from his childhood home. The trolley and Bradbury's words from Dandelion Wine. And then, far off, around a curve of silver track comes the trolley, balanced on 4 small steel blue wheels, and it is painted the color of tangerines. Epaulets of shimmery brass cover it with pipings of gold, and its chrome bell bings if the ancient motorman taps it with a wrinkled shoe. The numbers on the trolley's front and sides are bright as lemons. Within, its seats pickle with cool green moss. Something like a buggy whip flings up from its roof to brush the spider thread high in the passing trees from which it takes its juice. From every window blows an incense, the all-pervasive blue and secret smell of summer storms and lightning. And of course, the ravines. The ravines are an integral part of the novel. They are a place where the children of Greentown can play during the day to get away from the adults. But at night, they turn into a place of terror for everyone. And the ravines today still play an important role in Waukegan, but people are not as impacted by them as they were during Bradbury's time. The downtown of Waukegan is basically an island surrounded by the ravines. In old Waukegan, many had to cross through the ravines to get to and from town. You can see here an old map of Waukegan. This is actually 1860, so way before Bradbury's time. But it shows the ravine system, some of it, and the green arrow is where Bradbury lived. So to get into town, Bradbury would have to cross through these ravines. There were a few different access points that they would use. They could just go down Washington Street, going over the bridge there. But he found going through Old Powell Park to definitely be the most fun, especially at night. Let me share with you the ravines of Greentown or Waukegan in Bradbury's words. The rim of the ravine at the edge of the softly blowing abyss. Here the town divided, fell away in halves. Here civilization ceased. Here was only growing earth and a million deaths and rebirths each hour. Who could say where town or wilderness began? Each night the wilderness, the meadows, the far country flowed down creek through the ravine and welled up in town with a smell of grass and water. And the town was disinhabited and dead and gone back to earth. And each morning a little more of the ravine edged up into town. The ravine was indeed the place where you came to look at the two things of life, the ways of man and the ways of the natural world. The ravine was a dynamo that never stopped running night or day. There was a great moving hum, a bumbling and murmuring of creatures, insects, or plant life. It smelled like a greenhouse of secret vapors and ancient washed shales and quicksands. And always the black dynamo humming with sparkles like great electricity where fireflies moved on the air. 100 yards away, the ravine began. He could smell it. It had a dark sewer, rotten foliage, thick green odor. It was a wide ravine that cut and twisted across town, a jungle by day, a place to let alone at night. Now, there was great fear in the novel about being in the ravine at night, for a sinister and evil presence had come into town. This evil had a name. It was the Lonely One. The Lonely One was strangling and killing innocent women in the ravines of Greentown. And Bradbury had been influenced in Waukegan by an actual person known as the Lonely One. Now, I'll explain who this actual Lonely One was in a bit. But one of the great parts of Dandelion Wine picks up late one night. Lavinia Nebbs went to the Elite Theater with her friends to watch the latest Charlie Chaplin movie. Now, to return home, she has to cross through the ravine, alone and at night. Lavinia lived on Park Avenue, and she had to cross the ravine of Old Powell Park. This was a park near the Bradbury family home. It was a place where Ray and his friends played, and also a place where his imagination sometimes got the better of him, especially at night. This place still exists in Waukegan today, and the steps that Bradbury used as a kid and is referenced in the story, they are still there for all to use and enjoy. But let's find out what happens to poor Lavinia Nebbs as she tries to make her way home, going down the steps into the deep ravine, crossing the bridge, going up the steps to the other side to Park Avenue, where her home is. Here I am, she thought, the ravine. She stood on the edge of the 113 steps that went down the steep hill, then across the bridge 70 yards and up the hill leading to Park Avenue, and only one lantern to see by. 3 minutes from now, she thought, I'll be putting my key in my house door. Nothing can happen in just 180 seconds. She started down the long, dark green steps into the deep ravine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 steps, she counted in a whisper. She felt she was running, but she was not running. 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 steps. She breathed 1/5 of the way, she announced to herself. The ravine was deep, black and black, and the world was gone behind, the world of safe people in bed, the locked doors, the town, the drugstore, the theater, the lights, everything was gone. Only the ravine existed and lived black and huge about her. Nothing's happened, has it? No one around, is there? 24, 25 steps. Remember that old ghost story you told each other when you were children? She listened to her shoes on the steps. The story about the dark man coming in your house and you upstairs in bed. And now he's at the first step coming up to your room. And now he's at the second step. And now he's at the third step and the fourth step and the fifth. Oh, how you used to laugh and scream at that story. And now the horrid dark man's at the 12th step, and now he's opening the door of your room, and now he's standing by your bed. I got you. She screamed. It was like nothing she'd ever heard, that scream. She had never screamed that loud in her life. She stopped, she froze, she clung to the wooden banister. Her heart exploded in her. The sound of the terrified beating filled the universe. There, there, she screamed to herself. But at the bottom of the steps, a man, under the light. No, now he's gone. He was waiting there, wasn't he? She listened. Silence. The bridge was empty. Nothing, she thought, holding her heart. Nothing, you fool. That story I told myself, how silly. What shall I do? Her heartbeats faded. Shall I call the officer? Did he hear me scream? She listened. Nothing. I'll go to the rest of the way, that silly story. She began again counting the steps. 35, 36, careful, don't fall. Oh, I am a fool. 37 steps, 38, 9, and 40, and 2 makes 42, almost halfway. She froze again. Wait, she told herself. She took a step. There was an echo. She took another step. Another echo. Another step just a fraction of a moment later. Someone's following me, she whispered to the ravine, to the black crickets and dark green hidden frogs in the black stream. Someone's on the steps behind me. I don't dare turn around. Another step, another echo. Every time I take a step, they take one, a step, and an echo. Weakly, she asked of the ravine, Officer Kennedy, is that you? The crickets were still. The crickets were listening. The night was listening to her. Faster and faster, she went down the steps. Run! And she heard music, in a mad way, in a silly way. She heard the great surge of music that pounded at her. And she realized as she ran in panic and terror, that some part of her mind was dramatizing, borrowing from the turbulent musical score of some private drama. And the music was rushing and pushing her now, higher and higher, faster and faster, plummeting and scurrying down and down into the pit of the ravine. Only a little way, she thought, 108, 9, 110 steps to the bottom, now run across the bridge. She told her legs what to do, her arms, her body, her terror. She advised all parts of herself in this wide and terrible moment. Over the roaring creek bridge, on the hollow, thudding, swaying, almost alive, resilient bridge plank she ran, followed by the wild footsteps behind with the music following too, the music shrieking and babbling. He's following, don't turn, don't look. If you see him, you'll not be able to move. You'll be so frightened, just run. And she ran across the bridge. Oh, please, please, let me get up the hill. Now up the path, now between the hills. Oh, it's dark and everything's so far away. If I scream now, it wouldn't help. I can't scream anyway. Here's the top of the path. Here's the street. Oh, please let me be safe. If I get home safe, I'll never go out alone. I was a fool. Let me admit it. I was a fool. I didn't know what terror was, but if you let me get home from this, I'll never go without Helen or Francine again. Here's the street, across the street. She crossed the street and rushed up the sidewalk. Oh, my porch, my house. Oh, please give me time to get inside and lock the door and I'll be safe. She heard her clumsy feet on the porch and listened and felt her hands scrabbling and ripping at the lock with the key. She heard her heart. She heard her inner voice screaming. The key fit. Unlock the door, quick, quick. The door opened. Now inside, slam it. She slammed the door. Now lock it, bar it, lock it, she gasped wretchedly. Lock it tight. The door was locked and bolted tight. The music stopped. She listened to her heart again and the sound of it diminishing in the silence. Home. Safe at home. Safe, safe at home. She slumped against the door. Safe. And she listened. Not a sound. Safe, safe, safe at home. I'll never go out at night again. I'll stay home. I won't go over that ravine again ever. Safe, safe at home. So good to be safe. Safe inside with the door locked. And she looked out the window. Why, there was no one there at all. Nobody. There was nobody following me at all. Nobody running after me. She got her breath and almost laughed at herself. It stands to reason. If a man had been following me, he'd have caught me. I'm not a fast runner. There's no one on the porch or in the yard. How silly of me. I wasn't running from anything. That ravine's as safe as any place. Just the same, it's nice to be home. Home's the really good, warm place, the only place to be. She put her hand out to the light switch and stopped. What? She asked. What was that? Behind her in the living room. The lonely one cleared his throat. Now, poor Lavinia Nebbs. Bet you're wondering what happened to her if you have not read the book. Well, you're going to have to read the book to find out. Now, there's also a short story, The Whole Town is Sleeping, where that is based off of also. Depending on which one you're reading, from the novel or from the short story, it has a little bit of a different ending for Lavinia Nebbs. But I do encourage you to pick up Dandelion Wine and find out what the Lonely One does. So speaking of the Lonely One, and here are the steps at Old Powell Park that young Ray Bradbury used and featured within that part of the story. So the real Lonely One in Waukegan during Bradbury's time was not a murderer like he makes it out in Dandelion Wine, but rather the real Lonely One was a cat burglar. The Lonely One terrorized the city, robbing 33 businesses in an 8-month span starting in 1928. After each burglary, the Lonely One wrote 3 letters. The first letter was to the business owner explaining that it was his duty to rob them as he felt the police needed to, well, get better at their jobs in solving crimes. The second letter was to the newspaper, detailing the robbery and again stating that the police needed to get better at their jobs. And the last letter was written to the police department, and you pretty much know what the Lonely One told them: get better at solving crimes. Now, each letter was signed the Lonely One. Eventually, the police did get better at their job, at least in this aspect, with the Lonely One. And they were staking out a business that had not yet been hit, a hardware store on Genesee Street in downtown Waukegan. Well, the Lonely One breaks into the second story. A gunfight does ensue. No one is hurt. The Lonely One is captured. The Lonely One turned out to be Orville Wyant, a 19-year-old man who worked down for the railroad company as a coal stoker. The Lonely One was sentenced to a year in jail. He was sent to the Pontiac Correctional Facility. And in total, Orville Wyant, the Lonely One, all the things that he stole, it only amounted to about $100 worth of goods in 1928. So really not much. He really wasn't in it for the stuff. He was in it for the sport. And as a good citizen, was trying to help out the Waukegan Police Department. But Ray remembered the Lonely One from his childhood, and the Lonely One, well, its presence is felt in Greentown in Dandelion Wine. And then what of the title of the novel? The name refers to the actual process of making wine from dandelions. Bradbury remembered gathering dandelions for his grandfather and helping with the winemaking process. Now, before I read in Bradbury's words in Dandelion Wine this process for making wine, what you see on your screen right now is a map that Bradbury himself made back in 1972 when he was returning back to Waukegan for a visit. This is a map of the Dandelion Wine Territory, as he called it. So he has his home, his grandparents' house, the playground, the Old Powell Park where the Lonely One was, plus some other things in there. So the Dandelion wine making process. Every year, said grandfather, they run amok, I let them. Cried of lions in the yard, stare, and they burn a hole in your retina. A common flower, a weed that no one sees, yes, but for us a noble thing, the dandelion. They picked the golden flowers, the flowers that flooded the world, dripped off lawns onto brick streets, tapped softly at crystal cellar windows, and agitated themselves so that on all sides lay the dazzle and glitter of molten sun. So, plucked carefully in sacks, the dandelions were carried below. The cellar dark glowed with their arrival. The wine press stood open cold. A rush of flowers warmed it. The press, replaced, its screws rotated, twirled by grandfather, squeezed gently on the crop. The golden tide, the essence of this fine fair month ran, then gushed from the spout below to be crocked, skimmed of ferment, and bottled in clean ketchup shakers, then ranked in sparkling rose and cellar gloom. The wine was summer caught and stoppered. Dandelion wine, dandelion wine, dandelion wine. Now, the novel Dandelion Wine is a great read to start at the beginning of summer. Now, a novel to start reading around this time of the year is Bradbury's Farewell Summer. Farewell Summer is a continuation and sequel to Dandelion Wine. It takes place the following fall during an Indian summer. The story concerns a mock war between the young and old in Greentown, as well as the sexual awakening of Douglas Spaulding as he turns 14. Bradbury had intended for Farewell Summer to originally be part of Dandelion Wine, but the publishers felt that Dandelion Wine was already long enough, so it was published in 2 parts. Farewell Summer was published in 2006, 50 years after Dandelion Wine. A focal point of Farewell Summer is the county courthouse clock tower. The second Lake County Courthouse was built in 1878 to replace the first courthouse that burned down by a fire in 1875. The tower had a clock on each of its 4 sides. The clock chimed on the hour, and it could be heard over quite a distance. Here is the Greentown Courthouse in Bradbury's words in Farewell Summer. And the Lake County Courthouse was just 2 blocks away from the Bradbury family home. At that very instant, the town clock boomed 12 o'clock noon. The long iron strokes which came as salvation toward the town square, up at that great terrible iron monument, and then down at the grassy park where all the old men played at their chessboards. You can hear that darn thing ticking all over town. Bong, midnight, wang, get out of bed, boom, jump into bed, up, down, over and over. The huge round lunar clock was a grist mill. Shake down all the grains of time, the big grains of centuries and the small grains of years, and the grains of hours and minutes, and the clock pulverized them, slid time silently out in all directions in the fine pollen, carried by cold winds to blanket the town like dust everywhere. Spores from the clock lodged in your flesh to wrinkle it, to grow bones to monstrous size, to burst feet from shoes like turnips. Oh, how that great machine at the town center dispensed time in blowing weathers. That was the thing that bleached and ruined life, jerked people out of bed, hounded them to schools and to their graves. You see, Douglas Spaulding and his friends are upset. Each day they get older and they do not want to end up as an old person. Their dream is to stop time, and they realize that the courthouse clock tower is causing time to move forward and causing them to grow older. They realize that everyone in town sets their watches and clocks to the courthouse clock tower. So they come up with a plan. And all great plans involve fireworks, of course. They sneak into the courthouse, climb up the clock tower, and explode the fireworks within. Their plan is a success as the giant clock comes to a halt. Douglas and his friends go home excited and they go to bed. They wake up the next morning, though, realizing that their shoes have still gotten a little tighter. Their feet have grown more. Time did not stop. And now they realize that what they did to the courthouse, well, it's going to get them in a great deal of trouble. But that theme is something that occurs with a lot of Bradbury's things. Not wanting to grow old, always remembering one's young self, things like that. And last but not least, and I see a couple questions here about my favorite work that Bradbury did. My favorite work is Something Wicked This Way Comes. Bradbury, in a great tribute to the influences from his time growing up in Waukegan, his family, the library, and the carnival with Mr. Electrico, well, he brings those to life in the pages of his dark novel, Something Wicked This Way Comes. Something Wicked is a full-length novel that looks at the conflicting natures of good and evil. The story is about two 13-year-old boys and their experiences with an evil and mysterious carnival that has come to Greentown. It had been interpreted as the autumn sequel to Dandelion Wine prior to the publishing of Farewell Summer. The novel does contain some of the same characters as Dandelion Wine, but really it's its own separate novel. The carnival visit that inspired Bradbury to become a writer is the focal point of the novel. Many of the real-life characters that Bradbury encountered at that carnival in Waukegan come to life on the pages in Something Wicked. And carnivals were a frequent thing to happen in Waukegan during Bradbury's time. Here is Bradbury describing the carnival in Something Wicked. In the meadow, the tents, the carnival waited for someone, anyone to wade along the grassy surf. The great tents filled like bellows. They softly issued forth exhalations of air that smelled like ancient yellow beasts. For the tents were lemon like the sun, brass like wheat fields a few weeks ago, flags and banners bright as bluebirds snapped above lion-colored canvas. From booths painted cotton candy colors, fine Saturday smells of bacon and eggs, hot dogs and pancakes swam the wind. Everywhere ran boys. Everywhere sleepy fathers followed. And during Bradbury's time in Waukegan, the carnivals would have parades that would go right through the downtown. These were ways to let people know that the carnival was here and they were going to be spending their money with them for the next few nights. The Carnival Parade, as described by Bradbury in Something Wicked. Beyond the thump of their hearts, a great heart thumped. Brass trumpets wailed, trombones blared. A herd of tubas made an elephant charge, alarmed for unknown reasons. And here in this picture, downtown Waukegan in the 1920s, late 1920s actually, Carnival Parade. I'm willing to bet that young Ray is somewhere in that picture enjoying that carnival. And the lasting Waukegan influence on Ray Bradbury, the Waukegan Carnegie Library. The Waukegan Carnegie opened in 1903. No longer is it used as our library, but it still stands prominent on the northeast corner of Sheridan Road and Washington Street. Bradbury remembered his childhood library in a quote provided for the Waukegan Historical Society's publication, Waukegan History, written by city historian Ed Link. Bradbury said in 2009, "I was born in Waukegan in 1920 and had my second birth at the Carnegie Library in Waukegan. I came to full bloom there, and when I was 12, after reading most of the books in that fantastic library, I became Ray Bradbury. What more could I ask? What a wonderful town to be born in. What a library to grow in. What a town to come back to. A town that I know and love with all my heart." And the library plays a very prominent role in Something Wicked This Way Comes. Here are a few snippets describing the Greentown Library. Out in the world, not much happened, but here, in the special night, a land bricked with paper and leather, anything might happen always did. Listen, and you heard 10,000 people screaming so high only dogs feathered their ears. A million folks toting cannons, sharpening guillotines. Chinese 4 abreast marched on forever. This was a factory from far countries. Here, alien deserts slumbered. The library, all the books perched there, hundreds of years old, peeling skin, leaning on each other like 10 million vultures. Walk along the dark stacks and all the gold titles shine their eyes at you. Now in Something Wicked, the two main characters, Will Halloway and Jim Nightshade, take it upon themselves to save Greentown from this evil carnival. Mr. Dark, the sinister character in charge of the carnival sets up to capture the boys. Mr. Dark is also known as the Illustrated Man. He is able to capture the soul of a person, force them to work for his carnival, but then that person's face appears somewhere like a tattoo on his body. Well, the pivotal scene in the novel has the boys hiding in the stacks of the library. Mr. Dark enters along with a secret weapon of his, the Dust Witch. The Dust Witch uses her nose to smell fear, and they find the boys. Mr. Dark grabs Will and Jim, takes them to the carnival. You're going to have to read the book to find out what happens. Like I said, it's my favorite one. Perfect time to start reading that book. Technically, October 24th at night, that's when you should start reading it. And I hope that you enjoyed a different look back into the past of Waukegan, this time through the words and imagination of Ray Bradbury, learning about Ray Bradbury. If you have not read the 3 Greentown novels that I discussed this evening, I highly recommend them. Again, it is fun to read Dandelion Wine at the start of summer. It's great to read Farewell Summer then in the fall, and as Halloween grows closer, it is a perfect time to sit down with Something Wicked This Way Comes. Hopefully I piqued your interest without giving too much away. And to finish with ways that Waukegan inspired Bradbury, I'll end with reading a section of the introduction to Dandelion Wine, in which Bradbury was responding to a critic. I was amused and somewhat astonished at a critic, wondering how I could have been born and raised in Waukegan, which I renamed Greentown for my novel, and not noticed how ugly the harbor was and how depressing the coal docks and rail yards down below the town were. But of course I had noticed them, and, genetic enchanter that I was fascinated by their beauty. Trains and boxcars and the smell of coal are not ugly to children. Ugliness is a concept that we happen on later and become self-conscious about. And again, that supposedly ugly rail yard was where carnivals and circuses arrived with elephants who washed the brick pavements with mighty steaming acid waters in 5 in the dark morning. Waukegan, visited by me often since, is neither homelier nor more beautiful than any other small Midwestern town. Much of it is green. The trees do touch in the middle of the streets. The street in front of my old home is still paved with red bricks. In what way then was the town special? Why, I was born there. It was my life. I had to write of it as I saw fit. So Waukegan had a major impact on this young boy, and it helped create the visionary that we know today as Ray Bradbury. Ray Bradbury passed away on June 5th, 2012 at the age of 91. He is one of the most celebrated authors among 20th and 21st century American writers, novelists, short story writers, essayists, playwrights, screenwriter, and poets. He is internationally recognized for his extensive works in the genre of fantasy, horror, science fiction, and mystery. He is credited for writing 27 novels and over 600 short stories. He was also a part of 65 episodes of Ray Bradbury Theater on television. He is best known for his novels Fahrenheit 451, The Martian Chronicles, The Illustrated Man, Dandelion Wine, and Something Wicked This Way Comes. Bradbury received numerous awards and recognitions during his lifetime. He was the recipient of the National Medal of Arts, received an Emmy Award, received the French Order of Arts in Letters Medal, and has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Bradbury worked as a consultant with NASA, and as a result, has an asteroid 9766 Bradbury named in his honor, and has a crater on the moon named Dandelion Crater, and he was memorialized on the planet Mars, with the Mars Curiosity rover landing site named Bradbury Landing. On Ray's 100th birthday just a few days ago, on August 22nd, The city of Waukegan and the community partners dedicated a walkable corridor of Washington Street from his boyhood home at 11 South St. James Street to the Waukegan Carnegie Library at 1 North Sheridan Road, and will forever be known as Bradbury's Greentown Walkway. It's to recognize his well-traveled path as well as to serve as a lasting legacy to this pioneer of our modern era and beyond. And August 22nd is forever known as Ray Bradbury Day in Waukegan. Nationally, Bradbury's 100th was celebrated with a virtual readathon of Fahrenheit 451. It is still available to watch through September 5th. You can find it at raybradburyreadathon.com. We also have it posted and pinned to the Waukegan History Museum Facebook page. And there you will see celebrities such as William Shatner reading parts of Bradbury's Fahrenheit. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to listen to all those people read that fantastic novel. There are different celebrations, one of which is the Waukegan Park District's annual Ray Bradbury's Dandelion Wine Arts and Music Festival. And we just celebrated our 21st year. This event, just like the novel, kicks off the start of summer. And in the fall, the Waukegan Public Library hosts the Ray Bradbury Storytelling Festival. And there are some downtown establishments with names that pay tribute to Bradbury. These include Greentown Tavern, the Dandelion Art Gallery, and Nightshade and Dark's Pandemonium Brewery. And at that brewery, their brews are different Bradbury themes and names. My favorite is the Ravine. Local fans and supporters are planning and fundraising for a museum to be dedicated to Bradbury. It is known as the Ray Bradbury Experience Museum. You can find out more about them at raybradburyexperiencemuseum.org. They also have some posters there that can be downloaded and printed that were provided from the Illinois Humanities Council. Bradbury is featured at the Waukegan Walk of Stars with other famous Waukeganites such as football great Otto Graham Jr. and comedian Jack Benny. Bradbury was on hand to commemorate the naming or the renaming of Waukegan's oldest park, and it was renamed in his honor in 1990. This park, featured in Dandelion Wine, was dedicated as a national literary landmark with United for Libraries on March 16, 2019. Ray Bradbury Park is the first literary landmark in Lake County and was only the 8th in the state of Illinois. Last year, for Bradbury's 99th birthday, the community celebrated with the unveiling of a sculpture by artist Zachary Oxman. The sculpture, titled Fantastical Traveler, is Bradbury riding a rocket ship holding his masterpiece Fahrenheit 451. It is 13 feet tall and made of stainless steel. It sits proudly outside of the front entrance of the Waukegan Public Library. Our goal was to create something that not only showed the fun and youthful imagination of Bradbury, but also something that would inspire kids coming to the library to want to read Bradbury, and better yet, become the next Ray Bradbury. The Waukegan Public Library moved from the Waukegan Carnegie building in the 1960s. I'm sure, much to Ray's delight, the current library sits at the location of where Central School used to be. Again, Ray never truly enjoyed formal education, rather would go to the library, so his school being torn down for the new library building was a treat for him. Following Bradbury's passing, the Waukegan Public Library received Bradbury's personal and extensive library. This unique collection consists of the books that Bradbury liked to read and collect. Bradbury, being the avid reader that he was, had quite an extensive collection. The library also received some interesting artifacts, including the last typewriter that Bradbury used. Bradbury preferred the typewriter and never transitioned to using a computer. You can see this typewriter on display in the library on the first floor. Now, the extensive Bradbury Archives are today at the Center for Ray Bradbury Studies at the University of Indiana in Indianapolis. There, Professor Dr. Eller and his staff have recreated Bradbury's office, and they have been cataloging the over 100,000 papers, manuscripts, letters, little notes, all these things. Remember, Bradbury wrote every day, so there's a lot of stuff, both published and not published. Here in the pictures, I took a visit there a few years ago. I'm not sure if the tour generally allows folks to hold Bradbury's Emmy or sit in his desk chair, but it was quite a treat to see and experience Bradbury's office as they have recreated it. And then lastly, what has become of Ray's childhood library? Well, for too long it has sat vacant, hoping for something positive to happen. The Waukegan Carnegie Library is on the National Register of Historic Places, and it is also locally landmarked through the city of Waukegan through the Historic Preservation Commission. And just 2 weeks ago, the Waukegan Park District acquired the building from the city of Waukegan. Plans are underway for the district in partnership with the Waukegan Historical Society to restore and adaptively reuse the historic Waukegan Library to expand our history and cultural operations. This project is fully funded. We are currently working with Harbo Architects on the plan. We project to have the Waukegan Carnegie Center open in around 3 years. So be watching for that unveiling. In the meantime, we will have a virtual tour of the Carnegie that will go live on Facebook on October 24th, the night when Something Wicked This Way happens. So it'll be a Something Wicked theme and virtual tour of that historic building. So more information on that is available at waukeganhistorical.org. So, as you can see, Ray Bradbury may be gone, but he will never be forgotten. Just as Mr. Electrico commanded, Ray Bradbury will live forever. So everyone, thank you for joining me this evening. I have some questions here, it looks like, to answer. Let me pull these up. Favorite piece of work from Bradbury, Something Wicked. How many books did he write? 27 novels. Is Bradbury my favorite author? He's definitely up there. Yeah, I wouldn't have said that before coming to Waukegan, but then becoming more and more involved, getting to know Bradbury behind the scenes. Having a quick phone conversation with him, which he called the Waukegan History Museum. Hello, this is Ray Bradbury. I want you to talk to my publicist. That was my conversation with Ray. When they were publishing Farewell Summer, they wanted a picture of the courthouse clock. Bradbury was a member of the Historical Society in Waukegan. He knew that one of the courthouse clocks had been given to the museum. Unfortunately, that courthouse was torn down and the clock tower was destroyed by a fire, but he wanted a picture of that. I actually hadn't been on the job for very long, didn't know where this artifact was. Finally did find it and was able to send the picture to him and send other pictures of the courthouse that they used for the cover of the book. With our binge watching, phone addictions, and passive acceptance of propaganda, do you think that Fahrenheit 451 was eerily predictive of our present society? Um, it sure it yes, I reread that Fahrenheit last year, even before a lot of the stuff that's been happening lately and the pandemic, things like that. It just does seem very timely, even though it was written quite a few years ago. My favorite thing about Ray, really just the fact that he just didn't want to grow up, and I'm not sure he ever really did. He wanted to remember his youthful self, and I think that he always did do that. One anecdote to share: when he came back for the renaming of Old Powell Park to Bradbury Park, one of the stories he shared was that he had, as a kid, put a note in one of the trees, in a hole in a tree there at the park. And it was a note to his older self to tell him to remind himself to remind himself what it was like to be a kid. And he said that he found this note, told him to remember, and then that there's a plaque there, part of that dedication. It says that Ray Bradbury, we remember you. We remember you. Not only what he did as an adult, as a prolific writer, but also we remember him as just a kid, enjoying Waukegan, playing in the ravines, enjoying his family, and all the things that there were to offer there. My favorite part of Something Wicked. My favorite part really is the scene that I mentioned where the boys are hiding in the library. It's just something that living just down the street myself from the library, walking distance, and I've been in there a whole lot lately, even at night, just kind of envisioning those boys hiding in the stacks, hearing the door creak open, and Mr. Dark taunting them and then finding them. It's just a wonderful part of that story, where his father is prevalent in that as well. I don't think that Bradbury's children became authors. I really haven't had a lot of conversations with the Bradbury children. Most of my conversations with the Bradbury estate and family go through Dr. Elder with the Center for Ray Bradbury Studies. But it's a unique perspective that they have. Ray Bradbury is just dad. And they do love the things that we've done in Waukegan to honor him. But it's just dad. Ray's dad. Authors or literary works did Bradbury feel influenced him? From going through his extensive library, I think it was just, I think they all influenced him. Just an astounding library that he had. Some first editions, some signed by the authors, and actually this extensive collection is going to be housed and featured in partnership with the Waukegan Public Library in the Carnegie. So as we work on the plans for our restoration of the Carnegie, it'll include museum space, exhibit space, telling Waukegan's history, but we look to recreate the children's reading room, the room that Bradbury remembered so fondly, that really influenced him. And within that children's reading room, that is where we are going to show his extensive library. So it'll be neat to have Ray's library in his childhood library. I think I got through all those questions. So I'll stop with that. And George, how are we doing here?
Okay, great. That was an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
I've been sitting back, enjoying it as part of the audience. So I'd like to thank you very much for being here tonight. We do have actually two last questions for you. One is, do you have a favorite quote from Ray?
I'm never good at remembering quotes. The one that we always use in Waukegan, he said, I'm paraphrasing, unfortunately. Basically, it's jump off the cliff and build your wings on the way down, something to that effect. So basically, that quote just allows us in Waukegan to do things on the fly and at the last minute, because Bradbury says it's okay to do, right? Build the wings on the way down. So we do it that way sometimes. But
sounds good.
Quote, I'm never good at remembering quotes.
And another question, how do you think he shaped the way other authors wrote? He really starts to open the eyes and doors of more to imagine really in that science fiction genre, not just authors, but also in cinema. So, for example, Gene Roddenberry, creator of Star Trek, very much influenced by Bradbury's writing. So much so that one of the starships in the fleet is the USS Bradbury. Even in the newer movies by J.J. Abrams, he even pays tribute to Bradbury with a Bradbury ship. And Roddenberry wanted Ray to work with the creative team for Star Trek. Ultimately, Ray did not, but he was close friends with Roddenberry, and they did definitely throw things back and forth with each other. For a while there, it looked like Ray was going to be helping with The Empire Strikes Back. Ultimately, his services were not needed, but for a time he was on board to do that. And with other authors too, not beyond just novels, also in comics, things like that. Really, Ray does influence a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. Interesting. And one last question, Ty, if you don't mind. Do you think Ray Bradbury had an interest in anything other than writing?
Yeah, he had a great interest in cinema. He did a teleplay for a version of the Halloween Tree. He wrote the for the movie adaptation of Moby Dick. He wrote the part for that. Television, of course, as well. Not just Ray Bradbury theater, but in helping influence things like Star Trek, things of that I just mentioned. And always he was an avid reader as well. I mean, he loved reading what other people had written to. He really was parts of so many different things. I didn't even mention that he was a part of the original Spaceship Earth at Epcot Center at Disney. Disney also worked closely with Bradbury on things. So the interior metaphors at Spaceship Earth, those were created by Bradbury. So there's just so much to him beyond just the novels and the things like that.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to go